Hey everybody, welcome back to Kayfabe Critique. I'm David.
I'm Jason. I want to make a quick shout out to Brian Kine. ICP.
So, today, this episode is all about Vince Russo, but not so much covering the life of Vince Russo, but talking about, is there a smear campaign or a controversy against Vince Russo? So I know, Jason, we kind of talked about this one off before, but what do you think? Do you think there's a smear campaign against Vince Russo?
It's hard to describe it as a smear campaign, but it just feels like a lot of scapegoating is going on with Vince Russo, because when you think about go back to the Attitude Era, you can't deny he was there and he contributed. Then you go to WCW, and for what it's, people didn't like a lot of what he was doing. Mm-hmm. But, who hasn't had bad ideas in the wrestling business? Vince McMahon had Bash and Booger.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of things that he gets blamed for.
Right.
Like scapegoating, like you said, there's a lot of things that he gets blamed for that we know he didn't have anything to do with. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that people will point fingers at him and they'll say stuff, and it's like, wait, he wasn't involved at that time. He was gone. He wasn't around in that time frame. But what really stands out to me and makes me wonder, and makes me think that there's a controversy or a smear campaign against him, is how many people have changed their tune over time. Mm-hmm. Like, you can go to the WWE Network, go to the archives of Monday Night Wars, the old show they used to do on there, and watch an episode where you have, guys like Shawn Michaels, Mick Foley, multiple people in this episode talking about all the great things Russo did, but yet those same people now discredit him.
It does make you wonder, because,
and not particular those two, but I'm saying the multiple people on there, because
right.
You can still find things out there where Shawn Michaels talks about, Vince Russo knew what he was doing. He knew how to layer in storylines. He knew how to weave in and out. He knew how to, spin things. He knew how to set you up for the big swerve. You have Mick Foley where, he still talks about that. Most of the stuff that was great in the Attitude Era came from Vince Russo. But you have so many other people that have, you can find interviews where they built him up, but now they're saying, oh, he didn't really have anything to do with it. He takes more credit than what he should have.
And sometimes I wonder if there's a financial incentive for some of these people to say certain things, because if you have an inkling or a notion that you ever want to get back in the good graces of WWE, you don't want to say anything that they might not like to hear. And Russo said it several times, I don't care about getting a job with WWE again. I'm going to say whatever I want to say. But some people kind of have that, well, maybe I might need another payday from WWE, so I better not be out here saying anything that they won't like.
Right, and I wonder that a lot too, is that where the people's motivation is that, hey, I want to hang on to what can potentially be writing my paycheck.
Right.
And I often wonder, is the negativity around Vince Russo just starting from the WWE? Could it be perhaps because the numbers have never been what they were during the Attitude Era? And we all know he was the head writer of the Attitude Era. And if you really start, you sit around and talk to people, the Attitude Era is arguably the most favorite era of wrestling fans.
Yeah, it's our most watched episode.
Yeah, and so if you really look at those who are fans of the Attitude Era, if you start talking about wanting to get these people back involved in wrestling, but then you have the guy who is the head writer of their favorite time bashing the current product, are they worried that he's going to pull away viewership? Is he going to cause detractors of the current product? And so they feel the need to, hey, we have to discredit him so people won't listen to what he says about us.
That makes a lot of sense, because if he didn't have credibility, they wouldn't talk about him.
And see, and right, and that's the big thing too, is like, if he really wasn't that important, why is he still you have multiple podcasts, you have multiple, wrestling reporters, everything that continue to talk about it.
Yeah, like I was listening to 83 Weeks the other day, and Bischoff I think they were getting ready to do Sold Out 2000, and Bischoff couldn't wait. It was like he couldn't wait to just light into Russo. And
yeah, and that's a good example of kind of what we were talking about earlier, because if you look at that time frame, Sold Out 2000, you got to remember that he was already on his way out the door with WCW the first round.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but you take a guy that he built, we only had 90 days his first time around, and he had built up a storyline around a new NWO, which was Bret Hart, the Outsiders, Hall and Nash, and Jeff Jarrett.
Right.
Goldberg and Sid were the two biggest targets they were going against. But now you roll around after Starrcade, Goldberg's hurt, Bret Hart's hurt, Scott Hall's having issues and he's gone, and now by the time you get to Sold Out, Jeff Jarrett's hurt. So 4 out of your 6 main players are gone.
Right.
But yet they were dying. I remember because just the episode before that when Conrad talked about we're going to go to Sold Out, Bischoff was just dying to get the chance to just cut down Russo without really looking into what he had going against him. And Conrad does a good job during that episode kind of putting it out there look at all the guys he lost. How this would be hard to come up against.
Yeah, and the reality is that when he got there to WCW, because I think a lot of the heat he gets is because a lot of people's last memories of him are this stuff with TNA and with WCW, and they seem to incorrectly associate him with the demise of WCW, which it was a sinking ship when he got there. Yeah,
absolutely. And, people forget that during that first run, that first 90 days, how much it improved. You go back, watch the 90 days before he got there, compared to the 90 days he's there, and tell me it's not a better product.
It definitely is a better product, because, I've gone back and watched it, and even I've watched Sold Out 2000, it's the stories actually made more sense to me than they did, in early 90, from 99, you can tell a difference in storytelling from when Russo got there in 99 versus previously in 99, because you remember January 4th, 1999, that date always comes up. On one channel you got Mankind and The Rock, the other channel you got Goldberg getting accused of raping Miss Elizabeth.
Yeah, and from early 99, January 99, up through September, it's Nitro's on a downward spiral.
Excuse me, harassing Miss Elizabeth.
Yeah, so
correct.
Nitro's on a downward spiral, but then when he steps in October, first thing first is you had to stop the bleeding.
Right.
And then start to build, and to only give him 90 days to do so, who can overcome a whole year being dug into the dirt in just 90 days?
And if you really think about it, it was more than a year of bad booking.
Right, yeah, because some of the stuff that led into 99 was actually starting in 98.
Right.
And even Bischoff's acknowledged on 83 Weeks that some of it was in 97 actually started this stuff.
Yeah, so and when I've listened to Russo talk about his time in WCW, I get where he was coming from. He had a plan. He understood that you don't fix something like this overnight. Just look where he came from. WWE didn't get fixed overnight.
Right.
It took time. You had to build things. You had to look at what you had, and you had to repackage people. So 90 days isn't enough time to really fix much of anything.
And so you kind of touch on a thing that one of the things he gets accused of is that he didn't have a plan, that he flew by the seat of his pants. So let's kind of look at some of the things that he's blamed for, or that the negative things said about him. So one of the things they say, he takes too much credit for his accomplishments. They say, there's some people that say he wasn't really the head writer during the Attitude Era. There are some people that say he came up with the worst of the Attitude Era. They say his ideals killed WCW. They say he didn't know where he was going, and that he couldn't long-term plan or execute towards a long-term plan. So those are the negative things said about him. So let's kind of take a minute and just kind of look at those. So they say he takes too much credit for his accomplishments during the Attitude Era, and that he wasn't really the head writer during the Attitude Era. But we know Shawn Michaels has been on the record saying that, Russo was responsible for the creative of the Attitude Era. We've had Shawn Michaels also on the record saying Russo came up with a lot of the cool stuff of D-Generation X, helped push him to do more creatively, helped push him to be more edgy. Mm-hmm. You have Mick Foley talking about majority of the things people like from the Attitude came from the mind of Vince Russo. You have, Austin, giving Russo credit for a lot of the hot moments, those moments that, made people tune in, made people love the Attitude Era. It has been acknowledged by several people, by Bruce Pritchard, Stephanie McMahon, multiple people have acknowledged that writing sessions were initially Russo and Cornette with McMahon, then just Russo and McMahon, then Russo and Ferrara, because Russo asked, for Ed Ferrara to come in, and then Russo and Ed Ferrara would write the stories, and they would bring them to Vince McMahon, or they would go and work with them through Vince McMahon. So in every single one of these writing scenarios through the Attitude Era, he's there. Yeah. He's the one consistent other than Vince McMahon.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's Vince McMahon's show, so I mean, I could kind of see where people would say, I can make an argument that Vince McMahon is still the head writer because it's his company. And if he says he's the head writer, he's the head writer. If he has a final say, he can put his name on the credit and take whatever credit he wants. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's just how it is. However, Russo is a constant thread throughout the entire thing.
And if you look at Raw, go back and watch Raws prior to when he gets a part of the writing, and after he leaves. There's a night and day difference from when Russo starts writing, and there's a night and day difference from when he leaves and goes to WCW. So we know the ideals that made the Attitude Era were not there before him. You didn't see these things before him, and that they were gone after him.
Right.
You've seen the WWE try to continue it, but it didn't feel the same, and things weren't as cool. They weren't as cutting edge. They weren't as easy to predict.
Yeah, and I just think that with what Russo brought to the table and the things that he did, I think he understood more than anyone else that wrestling fans, while they love the action in the ring, they're drawn to story.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's what he brought to the table. And if he wasn't that important, then why would, they talk about when he talked to Vince McMahon about leaving, why would JR immediately call Bruce Pritchard to say, hey, Vince Russo's leaving? If he wasn't that important, why would they care that he was leaving? But you have stories about him leaving. You have Stephanie on the episode on the Monday Night Wars talking about, and so it was set up to where the writing would never be just by one man again. Well, who's that one man that you're talking about? Because he's the guy that left. Your dad's still there. Your dad's still there. So if you're saying you didn't want it to be in the hanging on just one writer going forward, well, this is the only writer that left. Other than Ed Ferrara went with them. So, but we know he brought in Ed Ferrara. He's the one that got Ed Ferrara hired. And so, even, now I know a lot of the, Dave Meltzers and everything, they like to, talk down about him. But at that time, when he left from WWE to go to WCW, they were giving him credit of the guy who built the Attitude Era. He was, it was his ideals. He was the main ideal guy behind the Attitude Era, and now he's leaving to go to WCW. But now all of a sudden, they talk like he wasn't that important during the Attitude Era. But at that time, even they were saying he was very important to the Attitude Era.
I think it all comes down to money. Or a lot of it comes down to money, I should say.
Yeah, and so, you hear talent talk about him, things that he came up with. You hear, JR's acknowledged, things that Vince Russo came up with. Pritchard recently has also acknowledged that was him. He did a great job. So I think we can move on from that, saying that, saying that he takes too much credit, or that he wasn't really the head writer is kind of definitely bogus on that, because we know he was around there at the time. But, so here's the thing that's funny to me. They say he came up with the worst of the Attitude Era. But if he wasn't the head writer, or he wasn't responsible for the success, how can you blame him for the downsides? You can't have it both ways. So, if he gets the blame, then he's got to get the credit too.
Right.
So, you can't say, like, hey, he wrote all the bad stuff, but, this is who wrote the good stuff. It's, if he's the head writer, and so you're going to blame bad stuff on him, then you got to give him the good as well.
Exactly, and
if he's not the head writer, and Vince McMahon's the one who came up with everything, well, then the bad stuff gets blamed on him.
Right. And who ultimately decides what's bad or good?
Right, yeah, it goes by the fan, the perception of the fan, and the ratings at that time speak for themselves.
Right.
Monday Night Raw was a party every week at that time. It was must-watch TV, and that doesn't exist anymore.
And you did not want to miss a minute. And, I mean, Russo himself has admitted he had some bad ideas. Mm-hmm. Or he is, as at least, or maybe he had good ideas that the execution wasn't great on.
Right, or, it's stuff that fit 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. 20 years ago, 21 years ago. But yeah, they may not look great now, or they may not be relevant now. But if you think about the time frame, what was going on at the time, Raw was hot. Raw had more fan engagement. It was exciting. And there was so many angles and swerves that you didn't see coming that, now it's kind of hard to duplicate that, because now, you really study it and figure out what's going on. Where back then, you just sat down and watched it and loved every single minute of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so... let's see, let's go to the next one. They say his ideals killed WCW. We know Eric Bischoff was the president of WCW prior to Vince Russo coming in. And, Eric Bischoff has already stated that, the company was starting to get hurt in 1998. Mm-hmm. And he's also stated, and so has Tony Schiavone, that the merger is what killed WCW, the AOL Time Warner merger, and that was already starting to happen before Vince Russo even got there.
Exactly. So to say he killed WCW, it's like that's almost. I'm trying to think of what that's. I mean, it's obviously not true. I mean, it's like saying that you killed somebody, even though it's like saying he killed them while they were lowering the coffin, basically.
Right, and people, like we talked about earlier, people don't acknowledge the short time frame he had in his initial run. They don't really remember that the improvements that were there, not only the improvements that were there, but the main players who got hurt as part of this. But then the other thing that, really, what really bothers me when they talk about his run in WCW is they cross times. Mm-hmm. So you'll start talking about, late 99 he was doing this, late 99 he was doing this, and then they'll throw out something that happened in summer or spring of 2000.
Right.
And it's like, whoa, there was a big difference there. That was two different time frames, because after he left the first time, you had a new booking committee step in, and they really started to kill WCW. That may have been the worst time frame in WCW history.
I tried to watch during that era. I tried to watch some of the stuff on network during that time, and I was just like, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember as a fan at the time, after he stopped writing initially, trying to watch it, and I think I made it half an episode, and I was like, what is this? And then it just continued to get worse, and recently I went back to try to look at it again. Yeah, and it was just bad. And so, I know they, like to throw stuff out from the year 2000, which later in the year 2000 when he came back. But I think that was a very different time. I think when him and Bischoff came back, he was in a more of a desperate situation. Mm-hmm. He knew that he didn't have much time to try to pop a rating. He learned that from his experience the first time around. But, you know, you've heard multiple times from Bischoff and Russo back then, you know, when WCW Magazine would interview them, that they would talk about when they met together and they looked at the product of where it was and what they needed to do, and they said they needed to blow it up and just come at it with a completely different angle. And you look at that April 10th, 2000, that first night back, and they brought in so much internet lore on wrestling history and spun it into almost like a reality-based show that first night. And if you haven't watched the April 10th, 2000 show of Nitro, go back and watch it. Especially if you were a wrestling fan at that time and understood the stuff that was being reported through the internet about wrestlers, behind-the-scenes stuff. Go back and watch that because it brought it all in. It was like the curtain was lifted,
right,
and the backstage elements came out. And as you listen to Truth with Consequences, you know that's something he's still thinking is the next wave of wrestling, that you could do a reality-based, bring the stuff from behind the scenes out front.
Hell, Bischoff just talked about doing that too.
Yeah, and so here he was in the year 2000 trying to do that. And so, yeah, I think, you know, where a lot of people, you know, start trying to mix the ideas. But if you go back and watch that, I think he was trying to work down that path early. And that kind of fits into the, well, he didn't have a plan. Well, because he was trying something different. He was trying to go with a reality base and get that, let's see where it goes. Get that, what he calls the organic.
Yeah, build. Just let it happen.
Yeah, so I think that's what he was trying to do in late 2000, which, you know, unfortunately that was Bischoff's first experience with him, and not 1999 when he came in there, him and Ed Ferrara with a plan. So I think that's where, you know, Eric Bischoff is one of the biggest criticizers of him not having a plan. And I think that comes from, he walked into a time frame where Russo was trying to do something different. And let's be honest, being different was Bischoff's key to success, was making Nitro completely different than Raw.
Right, and you would think that, I mean, it's unfortunate that he didn't really understand that, but maybe it's just the fact that they didn't really have a chance to, like, really, I don't know, maybe their personalities just didn't mesh to where they could, like, communicate and be like, okay, this is really what I'm trying to do here. And maybe Vince didn't articulate it as well as he could have, maybe, but it just sounds to me like, as Roddy Piper said, we have a failure to communicate.
Yeah, and I think, you know, maybe the articulating part, not being able to truly communicate his vision or his plan. I've wondered that as well, especially listening to Truth with Consequences, like as he describes things and you hear Bischoff's criticism, a lot of it is they're saying the same thing but not hearing each other. And so, yeah, it could have been a basic communication breakdown back then. Another thing that I've always found interesting was Bischoff worked with him on one episode, the April 10th episode. You know, they talk about, you know, Russo wrote it, Bischoff read over it, you know, made some suggestions, made some tweaks. Had Bischoff been more involved, could they have been able to carry that momentum, that success of that first Nitro along the way?
It's quite possible.
You know, could that have been where we know Russo and Ed Ferrara have talked about, you know, they don't, you know, Vince Russo doesn't like the term filter when it comes to Vince McMahon, but they both have talked about, you know, Vince McMahon would look at something they did and either, you know, cut it here or let's do this with it as well. And they talk about that was the genius of Vince McMahon, was, you know, adding that flavor, that spice, or that different look at their ideals. Could Bischoff have played that same role in WCW? And if so, could we have seen a successful run?
I don't know that Bischoff would have wanted to, but I mean, that may have been beneficial. It's just, I just think about what could have been had they come together. It may not have mattered because AOL Time Warner didn't want anything to do with wrestling. Right. So at the end of the day, I don't know if it would have mattered if they would have come back and started winning the Monday Night Wars again. They probably still would have been gone.
True, that's definitely a good point. I think in my mind it's kind of, I was just throwing that more out there. It's hard to blame the guy when he gets put into a situation and he is really put out there on his own.
Right.
So, But so one of the other criticisms of him is, they say he didn't know where he was going. He couldn't plan long-term or execute towards a long-term plan. But for that, I will throw out every single time WrestleMania 15. And the reason I throw that out there is you can go back during the summer of 1998, King of the Ring, and start seeing the foundations laid of where, Vince McMahon's bringing in The Undertaker and Kane to try to get the belt off Austin. We know this happens. This leads to the tournament. The tournament at Survivor Series 98, which puts the belt on The Rock. We see this lead into Royal Rumble 99, and then all the way up into WrestleMania 15. So we're talking almost an entire year building up this run of McMahon screwing Austin out of the title and Austin's fight to get it back. That's a long-term plan.
Sounds like a long-term plan to me.
And when you look at his first run in WCW, that 90-day build to this new NWO that Goldberg was going to have to try to fight his way through. You have a 90-day setup of a faction. You don't see that anymore today.
Right.
Today, at the most, you would get a month. And so you have a 90-day build to bringing back the NWO, and that was only the start of it. Had they not got hurt, Goldberg was then going to have to fight through the NWO. So you're probably talking another 90 days after, which then creates a 6-month storyline.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably talking about having Brett versus Goldberg ultimately end up at Starrcade 2000. I mean, if they had been able to, if nobody got hurt, there was so much more that they could have done with that, but injuries happen, and it's like you can have the best plan in the world, but if the people you want to use to execute it with get hurt, I mean, one's career is over. I mean, what can you do?
Yeah, or I mean, you could be the greatest coach in the world. I mean, just put it into a sports metaphor. You could be the greatest coach in the world, but your players can't carry out the game plan. That's not going to happen. And so, in the Attitude Era, you had Austin, The Rock, two of the greatest talkers of all time. And we know, Russo's big on promos and delivering the story, which, again, I love. Attitude Era is still my favorite era. But then you get to WCW, he had a lot of talent, but he didn't have that same level of mic skills that he had in WWE.
Right.
So when you think about it, I know we're kind of getting close to time here. So when we look at it, we know some people who initially gave him credit do not give him credit anymore. We know he's blamed for stuff that actually didn't happen under his watch and that he wasn't involved in. He's blamed for stuff that other people have acknowledged were them. They're the ones that came up with stuff. We know guys like Taz talk about, the plan, of talking to Russo about him coming in. And then after Russo was gone and he actually got there, how WWE didn't use him anyway close to that. And we know they pretty much buried Taz.
Yeah.
We know Jericho has talked about, he comes in at Russo with this big opening night, a segment with The Rock, and he's on fire, they're building him up, and then Russo's gone, and all of a sudden Jericho's like pretty much out of the picture for another year before he's anywhere close to being hot again. You have Val Venus, who, people now looking back talking about how good Val Venus was. Like Bruce Pritchard acknowledged, like, wow, I forgot how good Val Venus was. Val Venus talking about, when Vince Russo was gone, nobody knew what to do with him. Nobody knew what to do with his character, and they killed it. So, kind of looking at that, you have the talent that was there, they give him credit. But you have other people who refuse to give him credit no matter what. So, kind of putting the question back out there that we started with, is there a conspiracy to smear his name?
I don't know if it's conspiracy may be the right word. I just feel like
could it be revisionist history?
Maybe it's revisionist history. Maybe it's just, I don't know, people wanting more credit than they actually deserve. Maybe, I don't know, egos, everybody has one, whether it's big or small, everybody's got one. I don't know, it's just kind of sad. It's like, at the end of the day, does it really matter who gets the credit?
Yeah, and my theory is always going to come back to, that I believe that the need is to discredit him because of the time frame that he was the writer. The WWE was at its hottest point. When he was the head writer of TNA, it was at its hottest point. You know, and even, you know, when you look at some of the stuff he did in WCW, the second run, yeah, it was too little too late. The first run, they were actually doing some stuff good, but, you know, people feel the need to take away the credit from what he did, and I think largely in parts of they want to discredit him because of how openly he disapproves of and bashes the current product.
That may be his ultimate. That may be the ultimate reason right there, is the fact that he does not like the current product and he has credibility.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we recently on this episode of Truth with Consequences, he pointed out some, you know, interesting takes on what's going on with Becky Lynch. You know, like he pointed out, you know, like, wait, if she's the female Austin, you know, why would she hit Charlotte Flair and then run out of the ring? You know, I mean, and if you think about it, those times, Austin would have stunned someone.
Right.
Flipped them off, stood over them, yelled in their face.
Right.
If they would have got back up, he would have stunned them again.
Right.
You know, we brought about how Ronda Rousey, you know, cut that promo on Becky Lynch in the back, and Becky didn't do anything. Where, you know, Austin, somebody would have started cutting a promo on him, he would have punched him in the face. So, you know, and he's pointing out, you know, just these little things, like make these little tweaks here and there, you know, to make it better. And so, you know, I think that might be where they just don't like him openly criticizing the product.
That may be the ultimate answer right there.
So, tell us, what do you think? You know, is the criticism of Vince Russo fair? Or is it unfair? You know, let us know. Check out Truth with Consequences. They go through a lot of this as well. And let us know what you think.
Indeed. And also check out That's Life, Bro with Vince Russo. I'm a personal fan of that one.
Absolutely. So, stick around for more Kayfabe Critique.